So in this video, let us see how we can implement the Pascal triangle. What you see above is the actual formula or a representation to be more precise. If we consider these rows as, let's say, first row, second row, third row, fourth row, and so on, and let's say I actually wanted to calculate the value of this, which happens to be fourth row, second column. I'm not going with zero-based index just for the sake of understanding this better. So now I need to calculate what the value of, let's say, fourth row and second column element will be. So that is given by 4 minus 1, which is 3, and 2 minus 1, which is 1. So third row, first column, we get this. And similarly, this will be third row, and this will actually be k itself, which is second. So third row second will give me this. So the sum of these two just gives me 3. We had already discussed that in the previous video, but this representation gives us a formula which we can use in our implementation. Before we actually look at the code implementation of it, let's try and understand and use a simplest example here. Let's say we just want to print the first 3 rows. So what would that be? Something like this: 1, 1 and 1, and then 1, 2, and 1, which is what we are supposed to print. And remember, we are using a two-dimensional array, and this will be, we can visualize the array as shown in a matrix here. So what happens is, even though we are representing this as a triangle, equilateral triangle of sorts, it is not possible to do that with a two-dimensional array. So in the actual implementation, we will be doing it this way. Now remember, the elements of a two-dimensional array will all be zeros when it is first created. What we are supposed to do is we need to go every row and column, and we need to change the values that actually represent the Pascal triangle. So we'll see how to do that, but after or during the implementation, we'll see the values change this way. This will become 1, and this will become 1 and 1. This will become 1, this will become 2, and this will become 1. But then if you see, it is just a right angle triangle, and we also have zeros which we are not supposed to print. And we are also supposed to print it in this format and not in this format, right? So we will see how we can achieve this in our code. Let us also see the implementation in a couple of stages. So if I open the code here, we can see that we've declared we are asking the user for the number of rows, and we are trying to declare a two-dimensional array with the size being equal to whatever rows the user has mentioned. And this is where we are building the triangle. Now, before we see the implementation, I would like to first put a breakpoint here. Now we are kind of doing reverse engineering in understanding how this code works. So I'll put a breakpoint here so we can visualize how the array looks initially. Now I've just given the name triangle for the array. You could probably give it as matrix, or you could give it as ARR if that makes it a bit more clear to you. And also, I would want to set a breakpoint here so we can see the value change in real time. Let's not worry about how we are actually building the triangle, and let's not worry about how we are actually printing it. Let's just understand the initial view of the array and how the array is actually built by what we discussed previously. So let me start debugging this application, wait for it to be compiled, and yeah. So right away we see an error. Now this is expected because I'm using console.clear. We will not have a we will not be able to use console.clear in debugging view. So let me just stop debugging view for now. And just for the sake of this debugging session, let me comment that out and start the debugging again. The breakpoints will remain as it is. I've clicked on debug and waiting for the application to build. We should soon see a debug view open. Perhaps it is just waiting for me to give the value. But if you notice in debugging view, you have a small terminal-like arrow waiting for the input. So this is where we are supposed to give any input if the application asks for one. We can't use this as a terminal because this is a debug console. So if there is any input, we are supposed to give it here. So since we are just going with 3 rows, let me give it as 3 and click on enter. So we hit the first breakpoint. And if we see here, initially, all the elements are 0. So these are, this was expected. This is what we discussed. And now we are supposed to build this triangle value by value. Let's not worry about how that happens. Initially, let's just um, take a look at how the values change. So we have some idea before we start looking into the code. So there are different ways of understanding a given code. You could either go and trace the application line by line, or the way I would like to do is first try to get the overview, more like a top-down approach, and then start looking into the details of this. So if I continue debugging this, or maybe stepping into this. So if remember, we are just at this point. So if I just click on continue, what happens is instead of stepping over line by line, I'll just execute all these lines and come right at this point, which is all I need to visualize. I really don't want to step this line by line, which we will do it a little later. So maybe I'll just hit continue. And we had the very first changes. So remember, we want the first element and the last element of a row to be 1. And also, we calculated the values on the fly now. So let's understand this better by hitting continue again. We completed this. So the only element to be generated was 2 here. So we stepped out of it. And if we again hit continue, we'll come out of the main loop also, and we'll just come here and we've got our triangle. So maybe we will actually visualize this with more number of rows. So I'll stop this session here and I'll also close this, rerun this. And this time perhaps we will enter something like, let's say 5. So this time we have more elements here, all of which are 0. We'll start stepping or we'll start executing loop iteration by iteration. And we saw how the first row was ready. And similarly, we got the element in the second row, third row, fourth row, one final fifth row. So we saw how these elements were changing. So now that we've understood this, but yeah, at this point, if you see, this is not very indicative of how the actual diagram might look like. But nevertheless, we saw we are generating the values row by row. Now we need to see how we actually print them in the required format. So to conclude this video, we saw how a Pascal triangle's value is calculated by using its formula, and how we initialize a two-dimensional array, ask the user for input, how the array is initialized to all zeros initially, and then how row by row we start calculating the value of the elements and we start building it. So in the next video, we will see the remaining parts of this application.